Man, it's a real shame what's happening in LA in America right now in terms of the riots. But look, hope is around the corner. I'm being told that Prime Minister Modi has called both the protesters and the US government and is currently negotiating a ceasefire. India is hopeful that both sides will come to the table and will de-escalate. India has also said that if de-escalation does not happen, then trade between India and the US might be affected. So it is in the best interest of the protesters and the US government to de-escalate and reach a compromise. But complete chaos and bedlam has erupted in Los Angeles this week.
We're going to begin, though, with that escalating tension in Los Angeles after protesters against federal immigration raids clashed with law enforcement over the weekend, setting vehicles on fire. California National Guard troops were moved in at the order of President Trump. This is the first time since 1965 that a president has ordered troops in over the objections of the governor. He did it on his own authority. California Governor Newsom condemned the action as inflammatory, called on the administration to rescind it, said they were manufacturing a crisis.
Shit's happening in LA that would make Kabul look like Geneva.
Yeah.
In fact, things are so bad that they're even shooting journalists that are just reporting on the matter.
After hours of standing off, this situation has now rapidly deteriorated. The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA. You just shut the fuck up.
You okay?
Man, I'm telling you, if this had happened in India, where a journalist got shot while reporting on the farmers' protest or Article 370's abrogation, India's press freedom index would have fallen below Burkina Faso or Somalia. I imagine, in fact, that they would in fact stop using India in the press freedom index altogether. So apparently the trigger of the riots in California were that on June 6th, ICE conducted a series of targeted immigration raids across Los Angeles. Over 100 undocumented immigrants were arrested, many with prior deportation orders or criminal backgrounds. And as a result of that, segments of Los Angeles responded with protests. Many were protesting peacefully, but many also showed up with bricks, firebombs, and started fighting with the police. Outside the Metropolitan Detention Center, federal agents were pelted with chunks of concrete. Police were attacked, riot gear had to come out, flashbangs exploded. A union leader, David Huerta, was injured during the melee and arrested, but his presence only symbolized how organized institutions were backing the protesters. And that was just day one. By June 8th, the protests had metastasized into full-blown riots.
We begin tonight with our continuing coverage of the fast-moving developments in Los Angeles. Today, protesters were back out on the streets for the third consecutive day. President Trump deployed some 2,000 National Guard members in response to violence and chaos in the city. Those troops descended on the streets of LA. Governor Gavin Newsom is blasting the move, calling it, quote, purposefully inflammatory and an alarming abuse of power. Nearly a dozen people were arrested overnight as some protesters tossed objects at officers.
Thousands surged into downtown LA, and there was massive vandalization of public property and even police property. 4 self-driving Waymo cars were set on fire. Why Waymo cars, man? What the hell did they do? This must be how Iraq felt when they got invaded by the United States after a bunch of Saudis and Pakistanis planned and orchestrated the 9/11 attacks in New York. They must be like, why aren't you invading Saudi Arabia or Pakistan? Why are you invading us? Protesters sprayed graffiti all over the LAPD headquarters, the US courthouse, and even the old Los Angeles Times building. And then finally, the federal government stepped in when the local government was not able to handle the protest and deployed 2,000 National Guard troops.
We now have word that the National Guard has arrived in Los Angeles. This is important because unlike the way you normally think about the National Guard, and by the way, I just want to make sure these are images from last night. This is not the National Guard involved in this. The National Guard, we do not have images of the National Guard in Los Angeles yet. But governor is activating the National Guard, and there's a lot of history and material in the Constitution about why that's the case. The National Guard in California has not been activated by the governor. It has been federalized by Donald Trump. The Trump administration said last night it would be sending the National Guard to LA in response to protests over immigration enforcement operations.
We begin tonight, though, with a live look in Los Angeles. Protesters by the hundreds spread to the freeways in and around downtown Los Angeles, blocking traffic. A series of federal immigration sweeps sparked heated protests across the city for the past 2 days.
Nearly 300 National Guard troops have arrived under orders from President Donald Trump. It's the first time in decades that a state's National Guard has been activated without a request from its governor.
California's governor, Gavin Newsom, called it unlawful and threatened a lawsuit. But it was pretty clear that LA had lost control. The police couldn't handle it. The local leadership was paralyzed. And Americans are, I suppose, rightly outraged over the violence that is happening in LA. But I want to draw their attention to something that happened just a couple of years ago, halfway across the world. Because remember how the media and many politicians from Western countries had reacted during the farmers' protests and the abrogation of Article 370. They had given so many lectures to India and the Indian government on how the riots that had happened in Delhi on 26 January were actually just peaceful farmers expressing their God-given right to freedom of expression. How it's important to let them speak. How it's fascism if the government steps in and stops the riots. How many politicians were saying that they have an eye on the situation and they're monitoring the situation, and the Indian government must provide all avenues for the farmers to be able to express themselves. So now that LA is on fire and it's completely out of control, I want to tell them, guys, it's just peaceful protesters. It's just them expressing their God-given right to their freedom of expression. They're simply fighting the tyranny of the federal government and the unconstitutional laws that the federal government is passing. Just like in India, when the poor farmers were simply speaking up. The people currently rioting in LA are simply poor daily wage laborers. They're janitors, they're bodega owners, they're gardeners, just standing up for their democratic rights. How could you send in the police and the National Guard like this? This is so undemocratic. Because obviously you were so outraged when the Indian government tried to contain the violence caused by the farmers during the farmers' protests or during the CAA protests. So you have to give them the same leeway in LA. You must let them block the street for the next 6 months. You must let them break whatever public property they want for the next 6 months. You must let them assault as many police officers as they want. You must let them issue any threats to elected politicians that they want, because that's their democratic right, according to you. Because in India, remember, the media and many politicians from Western countries were condoning all of these things. They were condoning farmers breaking public property. They were condoning the rioters during the CAA riots. They were condoning assaulting police officers. They were condoning farmers threatening Modi with assassination, all in the name of democracy and freedom of expression. So what changed? Let them express themselves how much they hate America while waving flags of Latin American countries. It's only fair, right? Because why would democracy be alive in America today but was dying in India during the farmers' protests? Is it because many people in the West are hypocrites? Maybe these things will not happen in your country if you stop siding with rioters and terrorists in other countries. I know it's an outlandish theory. I know this idea is really, really out there. But think about it. You know, just give it a thought that maybe if you didn't side with rioters in different countries, maybe if you didn't side with the terrorists, maybe then those problems will not happen to you at home. Maybe. Something to think about. Something to chew over while LA burns. But I want to ask you, if you're following what's going on in LA, who do you think is in the right? Is it the protesters? Is it the federal government? How do you think the government should react? How do you think the protesters should react? Let me know in the comment section down below. And let me know if you think that Modi should call the federal government and the protesters and try to make a ceasefire between the two. Other than that, thanks for watching today's video. I'll see you for the next one. And to all of you, a secular pranam.